A seasoned wilderness photographer disappeared during what should have been a routine solo hike through the dense forests of the Pacific Northwest, leaving behind only his camera and the most disturbing footage ever captured in the American wilderness. For nearly a decade, the final moments recorded on that camera remained locked away in evidence files, too controversial and too terrifying for public release, until a retired park ranger's deathbed confession forced authorities to confront what they had been hiding. The grainy digital display showed 11:47 a.m. when Joshua Holloway powered down his DSLR camera and slipped it back into his weathered camera bag. He had been hiking since dawn, working his way deeper into the old-growth forests of Olympic National Park, chasing the perfect shot for his upcoming gallery exhibition. At 42, Joshua was no amateur. He had spent the better part of 2 decades documenting America's wildest places, his photographs gracing the covers of National Geographic and Outside magazine. His work was his obsession, and the wilderness was his sanctuary. The October morning in 2014 had started like countless others. Joshua left his small cabin outside Port Angeles before sunrise, driving the winding mountain roads to a remote trailhead that most tourists never found. His plan was simple: spend the day photographing the ancient Douglas firs and western red cedars that towered like cathedral pillars in this forgotten corner of Washington state. He had hiked this particular trail dozens of times over the years, but today felt different. The forest was unusually quiet, almost expectant, as if holding its breath. By noon, Joshua had captured several promising shots, but something was drawing him deeper into the woods, away from the established trail. It was a photographer's instinct, that inexplicable pull toward something unseen but sensed. He followed a faint game trail that wound between massive fallen logs, their moss-covered surfaces creating a carpet of emerald green. The canopy above was so thick that even at midday, the forest floor existed in a perpetual twilight. It was here, in this cathedral of ancient trees, that Joshua first noticed he was being watched. The feeling started as a prickle at the back of his neck, that primitive warning system that had kept humans alive for millennia. He stopped walking and listened. The forest was silent, except for the distant drip of moisture from the canopy high above. No bird songs, no rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Just an oppressive, unnatural quiet that made his skin crawl. Joshua slowly reached for his camera, not to photograph anything specific, but because the familiar weight of it in his hands was comforting. As he lifted the viewfinder to his eye and scanned the tree line, he saw it. A shadow that didn't belong, too large and too upright to be a bear, moving with a deliberate, almost human gait between the massive tree trunks about 50 yards away. His finger found the record button on his camera's video function, and he began filming. What happened next would haunt investigators for years to come. The creature, for lack of a better word, seemed to sense it was being observed. It stopped moving and turned toward Joshua's position. Even through the camera's viewfinder, even at that distance, Joshua could see the intelligence in its eyes. This was not an animal acting on instinct. This was something else entirely, something that understood it was being watched and was making a conscious decision about what to do next. Joshua's breathing became audible on the recording, short, sharp intakes that spoke of a man trying to control his fear while documenting something that shouldn't exist. The creature began moving toward him, not with the lumbering gait of a bear or the cautious approach of a curious animal, but with purpose. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair that seemed to absorb the filtered sunlight. Its arms were disproportionately long, and its face, when Joshua managed to zoom in, was a disturbing blend of human and something far more primitive. The footage, later analyzed frame by experts, would show details that defied explanation. The creature's hands were clearly visible, with opposable thumbs and what appeared to be deliberate tool use as it pushed aside branches. Its gait was bipedal but unlike any known primate. Most disturbing of all were its eyes, which seemed to track the camera with an awareness that suggested not just intelligence, but malevolent intent. Joshua continued filming even as his hands began to shake. The creature was now less than 30 yards away, and its size became truly apparent. It towered over the surrounding vegetation, its broad shoulders and massive frame making it clear that this was an apex predator, something that had no natural enemies in these woods. The audio picked up Joshua's whispered commentary, his voice tight with fear, but still maintaining the professional detachment of a man who had spent his career documenting the natural world. Then something changed. The creature stopped its advance and tilted its head, as if listening to something Joshua couldn't hear. For a moment it seemed almost confused, looking around the forest with what could only be described as concern. That's when Joshua made his fatal mistake. Instead of remaining perfectly still, instead of letting the creature lose interest and move on, his photographer's instincts took over. He adjusted his position slightly, trying to get a better angle, and stepped on a fallen branch. The sharp crack echoed through the silent forest like a gunshot. The creature's head snapped toward the sound with predatory precision, and Joshua knew immediately that he had crossed a line from observer to prey. The intelligence he had seen in those dark eyes was now focused entirely on him, and what he saw there made his blood run cold. This was no longer a chance encounter between species. This had become something far more dangerous. Joshua began backing away slowly, still filming, his camera capturing every terrifying detail as the creature resumed its approach. But now its movement was different, more aggressive, more purposeful. It was no longer curious about the strange bipedal intruder in its territory. It was hunting. The footage shows Joshua's retreat becoming increasingly frantic as he tried to navigate the treacherous forest floor while keeping the camera trained on the approaching threat. Fallen logs and dense undergrowth that had seemed like minor obstacles during his leisurely morning hike now became potentially fatal barriers. His breathing grew more labored, and the camera work became shakier as adrenaline flooded his system. What makes the recording so disturbing is not just what it shows, but what it captures in audio. As Joshua fled deeper into the forest, the creature began making sounds. Not the roars or growls one might expect from a large predator, but something far more unsettling. It was almost like speech, a series of low, guttural vocalizations that seemed to carry meaning. Linguistic experts who later analyzed the audio would describe it as proto-language, something that suggested communication abilities far beyond what any known animal possessed. Joshua's commentary became increasingly desperate as he realized he was being herded. Every time he tried to change direction, to head back toward the main trail, the creature would appear ahead of him, forcing him deeper into the wilderness. It was a hunting strategy that spoke of intelligence and planning, the behavior of something that understood terrain and tactics. The realization that he was dealing with something that could think and plan seemed to break something in Joshua's mind, and his whispered observations became increasingly incoherent. The forest around him grew denser and more primordial as he was driven into areas where human feet had likely never tread. Ancient trees, some easily 1,000 years old, created a canopy so thick that the forest floor existed in perpetual twilight. The air itself seemed different here, heavier and more oppressive, carrying scents that spoke of deep wilderness and things long forgotten by the modern world. It was in this cathedral of ancient growth that Joshua made his final stand. The footage shows him reaching a small clearing where a massive fallen cedar had created a natural barrier. With nowhere left to run, he turned to face his pursuer, and for the first time, the camera captured the creature in full, unobstructed view. Standing at the edge of the clearing, partially obscured by shadow but clearly visible, was something that challenged every assumption about what lived in America's wilderness. The creature was enormous, easily 8.5 feet tall, with a build that suggested immense physical power. Its face was the most disturbing aspect, a blend of human and something far more primitive that created an uncanny valley effect that was deeply unsettling. But it was the creature's behavior that was most chilling. It didn't charge or attack immediately. Instead, it seemed to study Joshua, tilting its head and making those strange vocalizations as if trying to communicate. For several long minutes, predator and prey faced each other across the small clearing while Joshua continued filming, his camera capturing every detail of this impossible encounter. Then, without warning, the creature began moving again, but not toward Joshua. It began circling the clearing, always staying at the edge of the tree line, always keeping those intelligent eyes fixed on the terrified photographer. It was a display of dominance, a demonstration that Joshua was completely at its mercy. The psychological torture of being stalked by something that clearly possessed human-level intelligence was evident in Joshua's increasingly panicked breathing and the way his hands shook as he tried to keep the camera steady. The final minutes of the recording are almost unwatchable. The creature's circling became tighter, more aggressive, and its vocalizations grew louder and more agitated. Joshua began pleading, his voice breaking as he begged the creature to leave him alone, promising he would never return to these woods, that he would destroy the footage and never tell anyone what he had seen. But his words seemed only to agitate the creature further, as if it understood exactly what Joshua was saying and was angered by the implications. The last clear image on the recording shows the creature emerging from the tree line, moving with terrifying speed toward Joshua's position. The camera captures a brief, horrifying glimpse of massive hands reaching toward the lens before the recording cuts to black. The timestamp shows 2:47 p.m., nearly 3 hours after Joshua had first spotted the creature. When Joshua failed to return to his cabin that evening, his absence initially caused little concern. He was known for losing track of time when pursuing the perfect photograph, and it wasn't unusual for him to spend entire days in the wilderness. But when he didn't return the following day, his landlord contacted the local authorities. The search for Joshua Holloway began as a routine missing hiker operation, the kind that Olympic National Park rangers dealt with several times each year. Park Ranger Dale Brennan, a 20-year veteran who had coordinated dozens of similar searches, assembled a team of volunteers and began working outward from Joshua's last known location. They found his truck at the remote trailhead exactly where he had left it, keys still in the ignition and his wallet on the dashboard. His hiking boots had left clear prints in the soft earth near the trailhead, but the trail quickly became more difficult to follow as it entered the dense forest. The initial search focused on the established trail system, operating under the assumption that Joshua had simply gotten lost or injured somewhere along the marked routes. Search teams called his name and used air horns to signal their presence, hoping that an injured Joshua might be able to respond. Helicopters equipped with thermal imaging cameras flew grid patterns over the forest canopy, looking for any sign of human heat signatures in the vast wilderness below. But the old-growth forest was like a living fortress, its thick canopy blocking most aerial observation and its dense undergrowth swallowing sound. After 3 days of intensive searching with no results, the operation expanded to include areas well off the established trail system. It was during this expanded search that Ranger Brennan made the discovery that would transform a routine missing person case into something far more disturbing. Following a faint game trail that led deep into the old-growth forest, Brennan found Joshua's camera bag hanging from a low branch about 2 miles from the main trail. The bag was intact, but appeared to have been deliberately placed, not dropped or lost in a fall. Inside, searchers found Joshua's expensive DSLR camera, its memory card still intact, and its battery nearly dead. The camera's last recorded timestamp showed 2:47 p.m. on the day Joshua disappeared, and when rangers reviewed the footage back at headquarters, they discovered something that would haunt them for years to come. The initial reaction among the search team was disbelief. The footage was so far outside their experience, so contrary to everything they thought they knew about the wildlife in Olympic National Park, that many assumed it had to be some kind of elaborate hoax. But Joshua Holloway was not known for pranks or fabrications. He was a respected professional photographer whose reputation was built on authentic documentation of wilderness areas. The idea that he would stage something like this, especially given that he was now missing and presumed dead, made no sense. Ranger Brennan made the decision to seal the footage and limit access to only essential personnel while the search for Joshua continued. The official search lasted 2 more weeks, expanding to cover nearly 50 square miles of wilderness. They found no trace of Joshua beyond his camera bag, no clothing, no equipment, no human remains. It was as if he had simply vanished into the forest, leaving behind only the disturbing footage that no one knew how to explain. The case was eventually classified as a missing person presumed dead and Joshua's family held a memorial service without a body to bury. But the footage remained locked in evidence files, too controversial and too inexplicable for public release. Park officials worried that releasing such material would trigger a flood of amateur cryptid hunters into the wilderness, creating a public safety nightmare and potentially damaging the park's reputation as a safe destination for outdoor recreation. Years passed, and the Joshua Holloway case became one of those unsolved mysteries that haunted the rangers who had worked it. Ranger Brennan, in particular, never stopped thinking about what he had seen on that camera. He had spent his entire career in the wilderness, had encountered every known species of wildlife in the Pacific Northwest, and nothing in his experience could explain what Joshua had filmed. The creature in the footage was unlike anything in the zoological record, yet the video evidence was too clear and too detailed to dismiss as misidentification or camera tricks. In 2019, 5 years after Joshua's disappearance, Brennan received an unexpected visitor at the ranger station. Dr. Sarah Chen was a primatologist from the University of Washington who had heard rumors about unusual footage being held by the Park Service. She had spent years studying great ape behavior and had become interested in reports of unknown primates in North American wilderness areas. Her academic credentials and professional reputation convinced Brennan to show her the footage, though he made her sign multiple confidentiality agreements first. Dr. Chen's reaction to the footage was immediate and profound. As someone who had spent years studying primate behavior and locomotion, she could see details that others had missed. The creature's gait was unlike any known primate, yet it showed clear signs of intelligence and tool use that suggested advanced cognitive abilities. Most disturbing to her professional eye was the creature's apparent understanding of being filmed and its deliberate stalking behavior, which suggested not just intelligence but strategic thinking. She convinced Brennan to allow her to conduct a more detailed analysis of the footage, using advanced video enhancement techniques and frame-by-frame examination. What she discovered in that analysis would eventually force the Park Service to confront the possibility that something unknown was living in America's wilderness areas. The enhanced footage revealed details that had been missed in earlier viewings, including clear shots of the creature's hands and facial features that defied easy categorization. But it was Dr. Chen's analysis of the creature's behavior that was most compelling, as she identified hunting and stalking patterns that suggested not just intelligence, but a level of cognitive sophistication that challenged fundamental assumptions about what kinds of creatures might exist in remote wilderness areas. Dr. Chen's enhanced analysis revealed disturbing details that had been invisible in the original viewing of Joshua's footage. Using specialized software designed for wildlife research, she was able to stabilize the shaky camera work and enhance the resolution of key frames. What emerged from this process was a creature that defied classification, something that seemed to exist in the gap between known species and the realm of the impossible. The enhanced footage showed the creature's hands in remarkable detail, revealing not just opposable thumbs but what appeared to be deliberate manipulation of its environment. In several frames, the creature could be seen moving branches aside with a precision that suggested tool use, and its facial expressions showed a range of emotions that Dr. Chen had only seen in the most intelligent primates. But most disturbing was the creature's eyes, which seemed to track the camera with an awareness that suggested it understood exactly what was happening. Dr. Chen's report, submitted to Ranger Brennan in early 2020, concluded that the footage showed a creature with cognitive abilities far beyond any known North American wildlife. Her analysis of the creature's gait suggested a bipedal locomotion that was more advanced than any known primate, while its size and build indicated a physical power that would make it the apex predator in any ecosystem. But it was her analysis of the creature's vocalizations that was most chilling, as she identified patterns that suggested not just communication, but actual language use. The implications of Dr. Chen's findings were staggering, and Ranger Brennan found himself facing an impossible decision. If the footage was authentic, and Dr. Chen's analysis was correct, then something unknown was living in Olympic National Park, something that posed a potential threat to the thousands of hikers and campers who visited the area each year. But releasing the footage would likely trigger a media circus and flood the park with amateur investigators, creating a public safety nightmare and potentially endangering both visitors and whatever creature was living in the wilderness. Brennan decided to take the matter to his superiors, but the response from park headquarters was swift and unambiguous. The footage was to remain classified, and Dr. Chen was required to sign additional confidentiality agreements that effectively prevented her from publishing her findings or discussing them with colleagues. The official position was that the footage was either a hoax or showed a misidentified known animal, and any suggestion otherwise was considered detrimental to public safety and park operations. But secrets have a way of refusing to stay buried, especially when they involve something as profound as the discovery of an unknown species. In late 2022, Ranger Brennan was diagnosed with terminal cancer, and the knowledge that he would soon die began to weigh heavily on his conscience. He had spent 8 years keeping Joshua Holloway's final footage secret, 8 years wondering if other hikers had encountered the same creature and simply never returned to tell about it. The thought that his silence might have contributed to other disappearances became unbearable as he faced his own mortality. Brennan made contact with investigative journalist Rebecca Torres, a reporter who had built her career on exposing government cover-ups and institutional secrecy. Torres had been investigating a series of unexplained disappearances in national parks across the Pacific Northwest, cases where experienced hikers had vanished without a trace in circumstances that defied easy explanation. When Brennan reached out to her through encrypted channels, offering information about one of these cases, Torres immediately recognized the potential significance of what he was offering. Their first meeting took place in a small diner outside Port Angeles, far from the park headquarters where Brennan still worked despite his declining health. He was gaunt and clearly suffering, but his eyes held the intensity of a man who had carried a terrible burden for too long. He told Torres about Joshua Holloway's disappearance, about the footage that had been hidden for nearly a decade, and about his growing conviction that the public had a right to know what was living in America's wilderness areas. Torres was initially skeptical, having encountered numerous hoaxes and false leads in her investigation of park disappearances. But Brennan's credentials and obvious sincerity, combined with his willingness to risk his career and pension by speaking out, convinced her that he was telling the truth. When he showed her enhanced stills from Joshua's footage, images that Dr. Chen had created during her analysis, Torres knew she was looking at something that would change everything. The creature in the images was unlike anything she had ever seen, clearly not a bear or any other known wildlife, yet too detailed and consistent to be a hoax. The intelligence visible in its eyes and the deliberate nature of its movements suggested something that challenged fundamental assumptions about what kinds of creatures might exist in remote wilderness areas. Torres began her own investigation, using her journalistic resources to verify Brennan's claims and gather additional evidence. She discovered that Joshua Holloway's disappearance was part of a larger pattern of unexplained vanishings in the Pacific Northwest, cases where experienced outdoorsmen had disappeared in circumstances that suggested they had encountered something beyond their understanding. Her investigation revealed a conspiracy of silence among park officials, a deliberate effort to suppress information about encounters with unknown creatures in order to protect tourism revenue and avoid public panic. Torres's investigation uncovered a disturbing pattern that extended far beyond Joshua Holloway's case. Through Freedom of Information Act requests and interviews with retired park personnel, she discovered at least 7 other disappearances in Olympic National Park over the past 15 years that shared troubling similarities. All involved experienced hikers who had vanished without a trace in remote areas of the park, leaving behind minimal evidence and no clear explanation for their disappearance. Each case had been quietly closed after perfunctory searches, with official reports citing probable falls into ravines or encounters with wildlife, despite the lack of any supporting evidence. What made these cases particularly suspicious was the pattern of evidence suppression that seemed to follow each disappearance. In 3 instances, cameras or recording devices had been recovered, but their contents were immediately classified and removed from public access. Witnesses who reported unusual sightings or sounds in the areas where people had vanished were discouraged from speaking publicly, and their statements were often omitted from official reports. The message was clear. The Park Service had a vested interest in maintaining the narrative that Olympic National Park was a safe, predictable wilderness, where the only dangers came from known sources. Torres's breakthrough came when she located Dr. Chen, who had been effectively silenced by her confidentiality agreements but was willing to speak off the record about her analysis of Joshua's footage. Dr. Chen revealed that her enhanced examination had uncovered details that were even more disturbing than her original report had indicated. The creature's behavior showed signs of not just intelligence but strategic planning, suggesting it had deliberately isolated Joshua from potential escape routes before making its final approach. Most chilling was her analysis of the creature's vocalizations, which showed patterns consistent with complex communication and what appeared to be emotional responses to Joshua's presence. Dr. Chen had also discovered something in the footage that she had initially dismissed as camera artifacts, but later realized might be evidence of tool use. In several enhanced frames, the creature appeared to be carrying objects that looked deliberately shaped, possibly primitive weapons or tools. This suggested not just intelligence but culture, the ability to create and use implements for specific purposes. The implications were staggering. If Dr. Chen's analysis was correct, Joshua had encountered not just an unknown species but an intelligent one, capable of technology and planning. As Torres delved deeper into her investigation, she began receiving warnings from anonymous sources within the Park Service. Phone calls advised her to drop her investigation for her own safety, and she noticed unmarked vehicles following her when she visited the Olympic Peninsula. The pressure campaign was subtle but unmistakable, designed to discourage her from pursuing a story that clearly made powerful people very uncomfortable. But Torres had built her career on exposing exactly these kinds of cover-ups, and the attempts at intimidation only convinced her that she was onto something significant. The final piece of Torres's investigation came from an unexpected source. While interviewing Joshua Holloway's former colleagues about his character and professional reputation, she was contacted by a wildlife photographer named James Kellerman, who claimed to have had his own encounter with something unexplained in Olympic National Park. Kellerman had been reluctant to come forward for years, fearing damage to his professional reputation, but Torres's investigation had convinced him that his silence might be contributing to ongoing dangers for other wilderness visitors. Kellerman's encounter had occurred just 6 months before Joshua's disappearance, in an area of the park only a few miles from where Joshua's camera bag had been found. While photographing elk in the early morning hours, Kellerman had become aware of being watched by something large moving through the forest parallel to his position. Unlike Joshua, Kellerman had chosen not to investigate, instead retreating quickly to his vehicle and leaving the area. But he had captured several long-distance photographs that showed a large, upright figure moving between the trees with a gait that was clearly not that of any known animal. Kellerman's photographs, while not as clear as Joshua's video footage, provided crucial corroborating evidence that something unknown was living in the Olympic wilderness. The images showed the same massive build and bipedal locomotion that Dr. Chen had identified in Joshua's footage, and the timestamps proved that whatever Joshua had encountered was not an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing presence in the park. The consistency between Kellerman's photographs and Joshua's video footage made it virtually impossible to dismiss either as a hoax or misidentification. By early 2023, Torres had assembled a comprehensive case that the Park Service had been covering up evidence of unknown creatures in Olympic National Park for over a decade. Her investigation had uncovered multiple disappearances, suppressed evidence, witness intimidation, and a pattern of official deception that reached the highest levels of park administration. But she still lacked the smoking gun that would make her story undeniable: access to Joshua Holloway's actual footage. That access came in March 2023, when Ranger Brennan's condition deteriorated rapidly, and he realized he had only weeks to live. In a final act of conscience, he arranged to meet Torres at a secure location and provided her with a complete copy of Joshua's footage, along with Dr. Chen's enhanced analysis and all the supporting documentation that had been hidden for nearly 9 years. As Torres reviewed the material, she understood why it had been suppressed for so long, and why Brennan had risked everything to bring it to light.